Welcome to TPA Talks. Today we're focusing on the nation's capital and whether the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is spending taxpayers' money wisely. To discuss this, I'm joined by a Londoner, political YouTuber, talk radio contributor, and passionate advocate for free speech and free markets. It's Mahyar Tousi. Welcome to the show, Mahyar. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm very good. Very good.
Absolutely our pleasure. Well, look, let's jump straight in, shall we? The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, was recently grilled at a Transport Committee session. He had some figures actually that the Taxpayers Alliance had produced looking at the high salaries to staff paid in the Greater London Assembly and also Transport for London. I think it was something like 654 employees paid more than £100,000 per year. As a Londoner, how do you think Sadiq Khan is spending your cash and indeed taxpayers' cash?
Well, that's the thing. So technically speaking, it doesn't matter what I think as one person. Unfortunately, Sadiq Khan has managed to hide from actual scrutiny. And a lot of ordinary Londoners out there don't know the truth because they don't actually hear about the actual numbers, how much Sadiq Khan has wasted the money. And obviously he has. And obviously there's a massive problem in the budget. But when you have someone like Sadiq Khan who uses political weapons to kind of distract the topic. He does all the good things. London is open. Like, let's just do all this virtue signal and stuff. Then obviously people see him as that sort of mayor. I mean, to be balanced, Boris Johnson also had issues. He wasted a lot of money. He also used his personality as Bojo to distract the actual scrutiny as well. So it's not necessarily just that it can't, but absolutely we have to kind of make sure that until at least the next election, without being partisan against anybody, Londoners know the real choice and actually what Sadiq Khan has done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned Boris Johnson. I mean, whatever happened to him? When he was mayor. I mean, when he was mayor of London, I think everyone, no matter where you are in the country, has heard of the ill-fated Garden Bridge. The £43 million of taxpayers' cash was wasted on that. But I suppose, on the other hand, maybe we are being too critical of Sadiq because, yes, you're quite right to mention, he likes to use his personality and his persona, and he has these sort of woke causes more often than not. But we've seen some good things from him recently, have we not? They want to move City Hall, save £55 million. He's also taken a 10% pay cut, which equates to 15 grand a year. And he's frozen salaries for senior appointments at City Hall. So could one say he's giving better value for money than previous incumbents?
No, it's all gimmicks. That's the problem I have. And actually, before we get into the alternatives, the whole issue is, for example, he's I think the cut in his own salary that he's done, what is it, about 16,000 or something, or 20,000? It's absolutely nothing. It's not going to help anything. Even moving City Hall to East London, you have a situation where you might say that, over 5 years, it might save about 55 million. But overall, the bureaucracy that's going to create the distance and everything is going to be, and actually Sadiq is going to have two offices now. It's going to have one there and one again near Central. So these are all just gimmicks. This is not going to fix the black hole that he's created in the main budget. And but again, the problem I have is that even, you mentioned Boris Johnson as previous mayor, even Ken Livingstone, this is more of a systemic problem with City Hall and London in general, the authority, because it's not necessarily, even if you have someone as a new mayor coming up and say, I'm going to be radical, unless that mayor is actually radical, a complete classical liberal or something like that, they're going to fall into the same trap again. They're going to make the same mistakes because, intentions in politics are meaningless. Again, Boris Johnson also wasted a lot of money on that cable car project. Like, what happened to that? So that's the problem.
And why do you think they're allowed to get away with this? What is the problem with the system? And how would you go about fixing it? How would you stop? Sadiq Khan splurged £22 million on sort of woke art. I think was the description that was used in the Daily Mail. We see congestion charge going up. We see the introduction of ULEZ zones. I mean, where is this radical going to come from? I unfortunately, from a taxpayer point of view, just don't see it happening.
It's because the London elections, even though it's supposed to be a big election, because it's usually big personalities, unfortunately, you don't really have big turnouts, which means people don't really care that much. Even when Boris was standing against Ken Livingstone, wasn't a big turnout. And so Londoners treat the London elections like local councils, which is really bad. Because that's another problem. The reason local authorities are failing is because there's no real scrutiny. So politicians don't really feel the threat from the electorate. So it's basically just when the election comes, you got Sadiq Khan, you got Sean Bailey, they're just going to play party politics, they're going to throw things at each other, meaningless stuff, like, I'm going to build 20,000 homes, I'm going to build 21,000 billion homes. It is just meaningless. And I think we have to change the way we scrutinize London. So that actually goes to media and actually raise awareness. That's what I try to do on my YouTube channel, to actually try to kind of talk about what's actually happening in London, so that people know. Otherwise, not many people know, for example, that Sadiq is hiring essentially a PA for policing, a Kwango, for about £75,000 a year in average, I think. And this is his reforming the police program by spending more money. But that's the whole issue.
Nice job if you can get it, £75,000 just for being a PA to a politician. And sadly, we see this far too much. Indeed, I mentioned our City Hall rich list earlier. You had a number of people on over £250,000, and they're being paid to deliver failure, and that speaks or being rewarded for failure. I see it very much speaks to the sort of systemic change that needs to happen that you see, and I commend you for doing what you can on your YouTube channel to highlight this, because transparency is a key cornerstone of what the TPA campaigns on. You mentioned we've got the election coming up. You mentioned Sean Bailey and obviously Sadiq will be standing. What from a sort of taxpayer point of view, or even more generally, would a candidate standing have to do to secure your vote, or even broader than that, to that would be popular with Londoners and taxpayers?
Well, it's tough, because I think what I want from their manifesto as a candidate isn't really what other Londoners usually want. Usually in politics and campaigns, it's all about gimmicks and easy, short messages. But what I actually want from myself is actually detailed and actually real plans, rather than just say, we're going to reform the police, we're going to build more homes, or we're going to reform the TfL. But how? You can't just randomly say these things. And that's a problem we've always had with all the candidates. You had Zach Goldsmith, we have Sadiq Khan, now you have Sean Bailey. That's the issue I have. And I think we do need someone who's slightly more radical in terms of the approach to messaging and policy. But unfortunately, usually the people who care about details and policies are the policy wonks and think tanks, and I don't think they're too sexy for the electorate. If you have someone like standing there like Milton Friedman talking, I don't think it's going to work anymore. It's all about gimmicks. So I think the issue we have is as long as we have someone who's more transparent, because you mentioned some of these bureaucrats earning, actually they're making more than the Prime Minister. But imagine if the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, gave himself essentially a pay rise, even like £1. And if his salary was more out there and people knew, people will kick off because he's a politician. But bureaucrats get away with it because they're faceless and people don't really see them. So the problem is not necessarily just Sadiq Khan as politician, it's also the bureaucrats, and we have to reform that as well as reforming how the mayor's office actually operates.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, just sort of one final question. We've seen, due to lockdown and coronavirus, mass sort of change in the way people are working now. London's been like a ghost town. I live out in the home counties. I commute into London, but I've had I haven't been allowed to go to work essentially because of the government. Do you think that that longer term that London is in trouble because of these sort of taxpayer unfriendly policies that have been introduced? I think of the ultra low emission zone, which makes it harder for traders, particularly the sort of classic white van man, to drive in. Potentially, I think it's up to £100 a day potentially to drive into London. That's before we even get into the congestion charge, which has now been extended. As well as obviously the high rents and all that sort of stuff. Do you think that not just Sadiq Khan, but previous incumbents have taken Londoners, taxpayers, for granted and feel they can just keep pushing the limits, but one day this is going to come back to bite them?
Yeah, I mean, not that in defense of City Hall, but they're just mirroring what the central government is doing. central government's been getting bigger and bigger. The tax burden is getting worse and worse. So I think they're just copy and pasting the same mentality. And you're right, London's economy primarily has always been based on services anyway. And so whether you're talking about the city, but also like on the streets, shops and everything. And because of the lockdown, you have two problems. You have people who are still scared to go back to work, even companies in the city, because these are the businesses that technically people can work from their laptops, in their bedrooms, they can. But that means all the local shops and local pubs in the city, they're all going to go down. And then they go down, obviously jobs will go down. And but at the end of the day, the tax revenues are going to go down as well. So this is basically London and the central government shooting themselves in the foot. And they're not going to understand this until it actually happens. Because all they care about, this is the problem with the politicians not understanding economics. They think the only thing that matters is when the headline comes, economic recession, or like deficit. That's not the only problem with the government. You're talking about the value for taxpayers. And if you don't create a prosperous economy, it's not really just about the short-term recession. It's a long-term problem, and you're not going to have people innovating anything. They're not going to have anyone creating new businesses, and everything's going to go down.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Well made. Mahyar, unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you so much for coming on TPA Talks, and hopefully we'll speak to you again very soon indeed.
Thank you very much.
And my thanks to everyone watching. This has been a special edition of TPA Talks, and we hope to see you again soon for the next one. In the meantime, your chance to win £200 in Wetherspoon vouchers on our VAT quiz. So find out more about that in the link in the description. We'll see you again soon.